Assalamu alaikum. Your Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural Reading for Pleasure Conference 2024. My name is Ni'ma An-Noor, and I will be your host for today. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude and extend warm thanks to our sponsors, DP World, the Arab Reading Challenge, and our travel partner, Emirates Airlines, as well as the amazing teams behind the scenes who have worked tirelessly to bring together this remarkable event. As we commence the first day of this conference, I would like to leave you with the following words. Books are the plane and the train and the road. They are the destination and the journey, they are home. Now, without further ado, I would like to start by inviting to the stage our esteemed Isabel Abul Hol, founder, advisor, and trustee of the Emirates Literature Foundation, for her introductory speech.
Assalamu alaikum, Your Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to the first Reading for Pleasure conference in the United Arab Emirates and the region. Today we gather here with an important and urgent cause to delve into the profound impact reading can have on all our lives, especially focusing on the key roles that the home and school environments, parents, educators, and the scientific community play in fostering a love of reading. I mention scientists because I believe that the ongoing worldwide research into the brain will hold many of the answers that we need in today's rapidly changing lifestyle, where AI and media hold us in their sway. Wilder Penfield said, "The brain is an organ of destiny. It holds within its humming mechanism secrets that will determine the future of the human race." We know that by the age of 2, the brain reaches 80% of its adult size, and by the age of 6, it is nearly 90% developed. Numerous surveys have shown a year-on-year decline in the time young people spend reading. They are reading less and less, with an increasing percentage never reading at all. With the internet, gaming, and social media, their days and nights are spent on an endless diet of short, bite-sized, addictive materials. Hours pass. No time for books. Why do we think that reading is so important when AI is leaping ahead in assisting us in a wide variety of ways? Can we manage without being readers? Is reading a necessary skill for the future? To help us understand the answers to these and many more questions, we are most fortunate to have with us 50 eminent professors and experts from near and far, and I would like to thank our speakers for taking the time to share their knowledge with us at our conference. But let's start at the beginning, the day a child is born. If a child grows up in a home where parents are readers, there are books available, the parents and family members take the time to read to their beloved child from the beginning, that child is blessed with a head start and lifelong advantages. Who wouldn't want that for their child, if they only knew? I'm also fascinated by the engagement of a child's senses when they are read to or read themselves, and why the senses are so important. Vision, smell, taste, as when they put a book in their mouths, and hearing. If they read on an electronic device, smell, taste, and the sound of a parent reading to them are removed. Educators, too, hold the magic key to unlocking the treasure trove of reading for pleasure in the hearts of their students. By creating a classroom environment where books are not just tools for learning, but portals to new worlds and adventures, educators can cultivate a mindset where reading is regularly anticipated and cherished. Empowering students to view books as companions that offer solace, knowledge, and joy can transform reading from a duty to a delight. Those teachers who read stories to their students on a regular basis allow all students, regardless of their reading abilities, to enjoy the tale, emphasise with the characters, and surely be more inclined to give books a go. As we note the scientific research on reading habits carried out over the last 25 years, we uncover a wealth of evidence supporting the profound benefits of reading for pleasure on our brains and our overall well-being. The neural pathways of our minds are enriched and expanded with each page turned, each story absorbed. The therapeutic effects of immersing ourselves in the words and worlds of others, of escaping into fictional realms or exploring the depths of human experience through nonfiction, are invaluable. Reading for pleasure is not merely a pastime, it is a practice that nourishes our minds, uplifts our spirits, and enriches our lives in ways both profound and subtle. I would like to return to the beginning of our journey on the Reading for Pleasure initiative back in 2020. I was asked by the UAE National Statistics Office to form a global council focused on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our council, many of whose members are here today, chose quality education, reduced inequalities, and partnerships. The Reading for Pleasure initiative has been most fortunate to have had tremendous support from our partners, in particular DP World, who have undertaken to provide funding for the 5-year pilot scheme in 6 schools in the UAE, the Mohammed bin Rashid Global Initiatives, and especially the Arab Reading Challenge for their unwavering support. Publishers, Hudhud and Penguin Random House, helping with the supply of books to the school. And very importantly, the key researchers from Zayed University, UAE University, Birmingham University, and Cambridge University, and the amazing children's authors who make regular visits to each of the schools to bring stories alive in a most entertaining and memorable way. The 6 pilot schools are amazing partners, welcoming us every week and embracing all aspects of this initiative. The teachers have taken the simple ideas and built on them with their own knowledge, and the parents are so supportive of what this means for their children. The sight of children pulling books of their choice from the classroom libraries or hugging a book as a cherished possession following an author's visit, the imaginative and welcoming spaces the school libraries have become, so children relish their time there, fill us with gratitude for the collective efforts of all involved. We believe we can make a positive difference for students' futures with the increasing knowledge of what works best and observing daily life in schools. Our conference will help us all on finding solutions that work and implementing them in our schools and homes to give our young people the best chance of a bright future. And finally, back to our brains. The human brain has 100 billion neurons, each neuron connected to 10,000 other neurons. Sitting on our shoulders is the most complicated object in the known universe. So please feed your brain a diet of books. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel, for your remarkable words of wisdom. Starting our conference today, we will be engaging in the panel, Reading for Pleasure, a Global Focus. This panel will look at the impact and implementation of reading for pleasure in different countries. Introducing and welcoming our panelists to the stage, Dr. Hanada Taha Thomure, Endowed Chair Professor of Arabic Language from Zayed University. Dr. Hanada also developed the Arabic language arts standards currently used by more than 200,000 students. Dr. Loh Chin Ee, Associate Professor and Deputy Head of Research at the English Language and Literature Academic Group at the National Institute of Education, Singapore. Her findings have been widely shared and improved policy and practice on reading in school libraries internationally. Debbie Thomas, Lecturer in Reading for Pleasure, Faculty of Wellbeing, Education, and Language Studies from the Open University, United Kingdom. Debbie is one of only 3 lecturers in Reading for Pleasure in the UK. Our moderator for this panel, Richard Drew, the principal for Jumeirah Baccalaureate School here in Dubai.
Good morning, everybody. A warm welcome, Your Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining this morning. It's a real pleasure and an honour to be the first panel on the opening of the conference, and thank you, Isabel, for your wonderful words. They resonated with me greatly. Interestingly, I was looking back at some old school reports from when I was a child. My parents had moved house and they were clearing out the family's reports. And when I think it was about 1974, so please don't age me, but I am very old. And it said, Richard reads well, but doesn't read as much as he needs to, unlike his sister Sally Ann, who will go on to great things. I thought, there you go. The head teacher was telling me that I needed to read more. As a parent and as an educator, and I've been educating students here in the UAE for 14 years, reading is something that is very important to me at JBS. We have the pleasure of having Isabel on our advisory board as well, and we genuinely want to improve the opportunities for our students to read. As a parent, I am very well aware of having two sons who are now in their teenage years, that reading is really important for them to develop themselves in all the ways that Isabel alluded to and beyond. But I feel a little bit out of my depth here with this distinguished panel of experts, and when I read their biographies I was thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to say? But we have some questions that we are going to ask for their comment on, and then we're going to open up for the last probably 15 minutes to the audience, and if you have any questions of our distinguished team here. So the theme that we're looking at is reading for pleasure on a global perspective, and as you heard from the intros, we've got Debbie who is in the UK and is one of only 3 reading for pleasure lecturers at the university, the Open University there. Dr. Lee, who is from Singapore, and then our own homegrown Hanada, who's the Zayed University, and is obviously engaging not only in reading for pleasure, but reading with the Arabic community as well, and that's really, really important. So I'm going to start off with the first question, and this is to Debbie, and I'll pass over the mic. So what I think we want to know is, what is reading for pleasure, and what does that look like in the country in which they work? So Debbie will be obviously focusing on what reading for pleasure is in the UK. Debbie.
Thank you. So in terms of what we would define reading for pleasure, we would be thinking about it being volitional, choice-led reading, the kind of reading that we choose to do in our recreational time, and encouraging children, obviously, to see reading also as a hobby, something they enjoy doing for themselves. But we also talk about reading for pleasure being important where we have agency and we make those choices, but also that we go into this as an endeavour where we expect satisfaction. Now, that's the kind of satisfaction that might involve, crying at a story. It has affective engagement for us, reading for pleasure, as well as, of course, being socially related. And I think that's a really important aspect to us in the UK, that although we might read as a solitary act, it involves the social with other people. Our thoughts and making meaning is about coming together with others. So reading for pleasure for us in the UK is a social justice issue. We know this is something that can make a significant difference to children's lives, and has become a really important part of UK policy. And I think that's one of the things we were talking about, wasn't it, earlier today, that we're very fortunate in the UK to have this now mandated in national policies. And so it's become a real driver around change in schools. So I think that's what we would say reading for pleasure is in the United Kingdom. And really importantly, it's about the choice-led agency that we have as readers. So are we going to pass over? Yes, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I guess it's now over to Singapore. So maybe before I start, just to give you a little bit of background about Singapore. Yesterday, when I was descending on the plane and I was looking out, and I looked at Dubai, I said, wow, this reminds me of Singapore, because we've got all the high, the tall buildings, the cities, and it's beautiful. And in that sense, I think there are some similarities, but I was told there are a lot of differences as well. But there is another similarity, which is that we are a multilingual society with a policy that emphasizes bilingualism. So our children learn English in school as the language of education. It's the official language of communication. And then they have to do a mother tongue language. So for me, I'm Chinese. My kids do Chinese or Mandarin at school. other people may be doing Malay or Tamil. So we have that two language bit. In terms of reading for pleasure, back to the definition, there's a strong emphasis on reading enjoyment. And especially at the primary school levels, we see that as very important, and it is built into the national curriculum. It's not called reading for pleasure, they just kind of term it as reading, but there's a long history behind the idea of book flood, having teachers do shared book reading in the classroom where there are these texts and they have these texts and storybooks and they bring it into the classroom. They have assignments, they have vocabulary lessons, they are designed around it to get students familiar. They bring the children to the library as well. When we first started participating in the polls, kind of doing the survey for polls, there was a little bit of a dip in reading enjoyment, and the ministry was really worried about it. And at that time, they rolled out this national curriculum called STELLA, stands for Strategies in English Language Learning and Reading. And they integrated into this program a key reading enjoyment component, which included shared book reading, library visits, and giving time to children to read in schools. So they found that that was successful because in the next polls, more students reported reading. With the more recent polls results, what was really interesting was that children were telling us they were reading at school, but they were not reading as much at home. So because in Singapore, a lot of the kids have access to devices, exactly as Isabel was saying, and perhaps, they don't have as much time. So the school was really making up for what they were not doing at home. So that's with English, and maybe I'll speak a little bit more about the other languages later, but I think maybe a point to note is that we see that for the other languages, it's a little bit behind. We're catching up in terms of thinking about reading for pleasure in the other languages, and it would be great to see more of that. Thank you.
Dr. Hanada, I think it would be great to hear from you on that because I think, as we were saying earlier, you feel that with the Arabic language as well, that the reading for pleasure piece is quite a challenge. What work have you been doing around this, and how would you identify with what reading for pleasure here is in the UAE?
Thank you very much. Lovely to hear from you all, and great to be with you here today. I think the relationship has been that of an ebb and flow with reading for pleasure, especially in Arabic. There is this school of thought that believes that when you read an extracurricular, something that is not a textbook, it needs to have a reason. It needs to teach you a lesson. It needs to give you something. What's the value out of doing that? And then there is the emerging, actually, new school of thought in the country, in the region as a whole, where it's saying, no, reading can be just done for fun. You can just read for pleasure. You can read to enjoy, to do something with your time that is constructive. So really, it's still an ebb and flow type of relationship. However, in the UAE, the amount of work that has been done over the past decade, just to mention, and Isabel mentioned it, you mentioned it, the Arabic Reading Challenge that has seen, 50 million children around the globe. It's not just UAE specific. It has really started regionally and then internationally, including anyone who is willing and able to read in Arabic. And this by itself, that initiative may be the largest, the biggest one in the world on reading in Arabic, has done something. It is changing, and things take time. Change does not just happen in a month, in a year, in a decade. It just takes time because you are building thought around it. You are making people, first of all, they will reject, like, why are you reading something that is not teaching you something? And then they will get confused. And then they will get that cognitive dissonance. Like, maybe yes, maybe no, I really don't know. And then the change eventually happens, and habits are established. And reading actually is a habit. It has to be ingrained. It has to be, sometimes we say, yes, we talk about choice, the importance of having choice in what you read and the reading for pleasure itself. But sometimes you have to force it to become a habit, and then you can do all the choice and the pleasure for reading that you want. But forcing it means you read every day, you read every day, you ingrain it, and that's how it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that leads on nicely to the one of the reasons why we're here, and I'm sure the audience would like to know what are the things that are happening in your work in your area in your country that really are being implemented that are being successful, and maybe are there any lessons to learn from things that you've tried that aren't successful? Could you just kind of develop that for us from Singapore?
Maybe I'll just add to that, because I wanted to respond when you were talking about, when Dr. Hanada was talking about, the idea that reading has to be for work. If you're reading for fun, then you're not studying. So please don't read. And there is this article that was published in Singapore in 2000 on research that was conducted, and that was exactly the attitude. So there was that emphasis on reading, but when the child started reading a book, the child would be told, you need to study, so this is reading for pleasure. It doesn't contribute to your learning. So do it when it's after the examinations, when you have some time. But there has been a shift in that attitude. And now we know from research that has been conducted around the world and in Singapore as well, that the more you read for leisure outside of school, the more likely that you will be a proficient reader, and the more likely that, it will be good for you. So with this research, actually, people are becoming aware that actually this leisure reading is good for you. There's this study in Canada, conducted by Sandra Martin Ching, and they look at what teenagers are reading. And what they found was that it doesn't matter what they are reading, but it matters how much they are reading. So it is better for the teenagers to be reading many young adult books, for example, than just one classic in the entire year, because that volume actually helps with the reading proficiency because it creates more practice. So in Singapore, because we've had that shift in terms of thinking, particularly in the primary school classroom, as I shared, there is this Stella program. It is a national-wide curriculum. All the teachers are trained. They all use the program. The program is successful in some ways. It is successful because it is a national curriculum. It provides a baseline. But as all of us know, our students are different. Our schools are different. So it is good if the school is not doing so well, because it gives them a baseline program to aim for, and teachers are able to execute. But ongoing research have shown that the program is best utilized when teachers are flexible. So they will look at their students and they'll say, I need to adapt this. My students are really at a certain proficiency level. Let me add more books so that, I can get them there, and let me tweak the program. So that is when it is most successful. Another more recent successful thing that has happened is that we've had more attention paid to school libraries, because with the teenagers, we tend to think they already know how to read, so we don't have to bother with reading for pleasure. But actually, we realize that the teenagers still need to read. And our libraries in Singapore, we have libraries, but they used to be kind of really boring places on the top floor. You had to make extra effort to get there. But now, because of this recognition that the library is so important, the government is actually putting money in to improve the school library. Initially, it used to, when we first started with the research, a lot of schools were doing it on their own. But more recently, just last year, they have started a steering committee headed by the Director General of Education, looking at the school library because they want to improve the programming and the curriculum of the school library. So in a sense, that's what's worked, and perhaps not so much what has not worked, but in order for things to work, they need to be contextualized on the ground, and that sometimes is a little complicated.
So Debbie, what about over in the UK? What are things that are working well there?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier, I mentioned about the fact that in the UK, Reading for Pleasure has been quite an organic process of change. And I think it's involved lots of different agents and agencies being involved in that. So we now have that mandated in policy around a national curriculum and also around our statutory documentations that now include Reading for Pleasure. But that's taken time for that to happen. And it's involved a lot of different charities have been involved, as well as education agencies and as well as schools and teachers themselves. And I think we've sort of come at Reading for Pleasure from lots of different perspectives in the UK. So we have a real groundswell of teachers actually teaching themselves and working together through a programme called our Teachers Reading Groups, which sound like that's teachers getting together and reading books, which kind of it is on one level, but it's also about understanding the research behind this, why Reading for Pleasure is so powerful, the difference it will make, and also trying to translate that research into practice. And that's really what a lot of my role is as a lecturer around Reading for Pleasure, is spending time working with teachers directly in schools, looking at how do we take what we know are enormous benefits for children around Reading for Pleasure, you know, cognitively, relationally, for their well-being, as well as for their academic success. How do we translate that into something practical we can do in the classroom? So we run a number of programs that actually translate the research into practice. And we look at, you know, what do we need as teachers to understand? What's the knowledge we need? Which obviously is around children's literature and understanding literature, but also our knowledge of children as readers. What do we understand about them as human beings? How they choose to read, where, when, what do they like, what are they interested in? And then we also need to have key ways of enacting that. So we talk to teachers about the pedagogies that we would use around the social reading environment, which, you know, Chin Ee was talking about libraries. That's a really core part of our work. But also around how we give children time for independent reading, time to do that choice-led reading for pleasure as part of the classroom practice. And also reading aloud and how we can use reading aloud as a tool to enable children to access reading for pleasure, giving them an opportunity to get engaged in the world of text and be really immersed in that, even if they're not yet ready to read that text independently for themselves. So reading aloud is a really core strand of that work. And also talking to children and working with schools to build communities of readers, which within that, that's talking about what does it mean to be a reader? What do I do as a reader? How do I behave? And alongside that, teaching our teachers about what it means to be a reader in the classroom. So thinking about our reading teachers, and that's, you know, a really significant part of our work. So the programs that we run focus on those strands, which I think are probably going to come out in today's conference, many of those strands of that research, as being really important. And we bridge the gap between that research and work practically in the way I think probably the program Isabel's been talking about is doing with schools here. But I also said there about teachers working from the ground up, and we do have teacher reading groups who work together, again, on their own research projects to actually enact this in their own classrooms, and that's really powerful and has built a community of teachers across, first of all, the UK, but now internationally. We have groups right across Australia. There's a group here in Dubai. That the teachers are in charge of actually working practically in their classrooms to change reading for pleasure. So I think those are some of the things that have worked really well in the UK. But we continue that journey. You know, we're not there. We've still got lots of things we want to work on. And we're beginning to tip the balance between the kind of will and skill of reading. We've been very heavily focused in the past on the skills. And I think some of the PEARLS results show, you know, we've had success in terms of attainment. But we're still working on that will to read. The motivation and children enjoying reading is not where we want it to be yet in the UK. So we still have work to do. But I think that's some of the things that are working well for us.
I hate to mention the dreaded COVID word. Do you remember those days? But in our school, when we were back in school, but were still very much trying to isolate students in terms of where they were able to sit and where they were able to travel and keeping them in their bubbles. And some of my library staff, both current and former, are sitting in the audience, so they will smile when I remember this. When they came up to me and said, Mr. Drew, please can you purchase some trolleys? And I said, why do we need trolleys? Are we delivering tea and biscuits to the students during COVID? No, we're going to take the books to the students. And after about 20 seconds of persuasion, we bought some trolleys. And our reading went up by over 30% in our secondary school students because we were taking the books to the students and students were now accessing it. So they weren't being expected to attend the library, we were taking the books to them. And to this day, we still have an iteration of that going on at our school because we wanted to keep the momentum going with students. So COVID did many things, but that was a really good thing for reading at JBS and I'm sure across other schools as well. Dr. Taha, can I come to you for the next question? Sorry, Dr. Hanada. Culture and the culture of the UAE and the different cultures that we have here. I have 91 different nationalities at my school, as I was saying earlier on, and we have first language Arabic speakers, first language French speakers, as well as first language English and many more. How does culture play out with reading and a starting point for reading for pleasure? Have you got any thoughts on the culture? Because we are talking about the global focus here, and here in Dubai we have people from all over the world, and I think that does play a part in the aspirations and the needs and the desires of people wanting to read for pleasure.
I think if anything, it would enrich your experience. You are exposed to so many cultures and ideas and traditions and ways of thinking and ways of acting, ways of reading, to where it will actually have a positive effect. We know the only thing is that how do you, within the context of UAE, where English seems to be becoming more of the lingua franca, really, especially as a language of instruction in so many schools, how do you ensure that other languages, Arabic, of course, the mother tongue of the country, the language of the country, and other languages also spoken by other people living here, how do you ensure that these students are getting enough doses of reading in their mother tongue? And I think this is where sometimes an initiative or a project that is breaking ground, like the Reading for Pleasure we are working on now here in the UAE, in Dubai, it will make sense. The way they are working is that everything is bilingual. So the students will have equal access to Arabic books just as they have access to English books. The working on classroom libraries to where, for example, 60 titles, 30 will be in Arabic and 30 will be in English. And this way, you are giving back to the word social justice. It has to be in what we present to kids as well. I can't present a whole basket to them in English and just say, all right, try to read in Arabic as well, or vice versa. We need to be able to give them equal opportunity to look at the languages, to see how illustrations differ between English and Arabic. What are the cultural nuances you might see in an Arabic book that you might not see in an English book, and vice versa. The way rhetoric is used, the way similes are used between the two languages. And I think it's a huge opportunity to learn, let alone, so there is the reading for pleasure, but the learning you get out of it, what you can get out of that is just incredible, because just now you are being able to compare and contrast. And this is at the higher level of cognitive thinking and cognitive functioning. It really makes a difference. So I think with a project like that, starting small, so now it's in 6 schools, if it can become organically part of what a school is, part of a school culture, if it can truly stay true to its bilingual nature, giving due respect to the language of the land, to Arabic, and giving due respect to the language which everyone wants to learn and work with and what have you. So I think this can lead to places, especially if we marry to that research that can truly look deeply into why did this work? Why did this not work? And how we can replicate this. Replication and going big, going large scale would be one of the biggest challenges to such a thing, and to see how culture interplays in all of that. Are we able to change parents' thinking? Because that's where culture also comes into play. I'm like, Lala, go study. Go study, that's better. Go read your textbook. Go read your school book. Or are we able, over the 5 years of the life of this project, to change hearts and minds over it? Are we able to change teachers' thinking about reading, that reading is actually organically part of what they need to be doing? So there is a lot that needs to be happening, and I think this project will be an eye-opener for all of us.
Yeah, you mentioned in Singapore about the different cultures earlier. Do you want to just develop
Yeah.
your thinking on that?
Yeah, so actually I was thinking about it and thinking about, beyond the initiatives, what can be done. And I draw a lot on my work from school libraries. But, the thing about being intentional is that sometimes there are things that we see every day that we don't really think about. But if we made that little change, it could actually signal something. So, for example, I was talking about my colleague from the Asian Languages and Cultures Department in NIE, and we are going through a campus refreshment exercise. And one of the things that he has been asking for on his wish list is, he says, in English, I know everybody can read in English, but we are a multilingual country. So could you please make sure that the signages are in 4 languages? Because when you do that, you're actually signaling to people that these are important. Now, another thing that I have found really important in my conversation with librarians and teachers is that sometimes we don't give enough attention to the mother tongue in Singapore. And part of the reason is that it is so easy to get English books. There are so many English young adult books, so many children's books. It is so easy. It is still all right when it comes to Chinese books, but for Malay and Tamil books, especially for young adult age group, it is very hard to find books. So I have issues when I go to the library, and we've done a lot of work refurbishing the library, and I'm talking to the teachers. And I remember this conversation, and this is the Chinese teacher who's in charge of all the mother tongue languages. And he says, we don't have a lot of mother tongue books, just give me a small corner. And I'm like, no, you cannot take a small corner. You have to take this section that is right behind, and you have to take the whole section, and you can front face your book, put them front facing so that, students can see. Use that to fill up your space, because this is all going to be for your mother tongue books. So that's a very deliberate decision in the library to give the mother tongue books a very prominent space, and to say that it's all right, I don't have that collection now, but I'm going to grow it, so I'm going to give that space for it. Another example, and this is from a primary school library that I visited just 3 days ago, and they were very proud. They had a little shelf, which was just the right height for primary school students, and they were very proud of it, and they said, look, we've purchased all these books. They are just right for our students who are 7 and 8 years old. And it was great. It was a good initiative. The only thing that I told them was the shelf is a little bit too deep, because it's not really a bookshelf. It's more like a shelf where you put things. So it's good for when the teachers bring your children to the library. But when the children are in the library, it is not visible to them. So you must make sure that these books are visible in your library through the way you are displaying them, through the space you've given to them, as well as through the signages that is going to make it so obvious that it's there. So I think this is a very practical thing. It's a very little thing, but it makes a big difference.
So Debbie, London, very multicultural, and Debbie herself was telling me that in her formative years she was a teacher in the classroom. So what do you think culture plays a part in the schools that you've worked in and in your role now in London?
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually really importantly, I think the what you've been talking about from both of your contexts reminds me of the work actually in the UK where we've been working with publishers, because I think they have a huge role to play in representing the cultures in our society. And that's been one of the pieces of work that's happened just recently, literacy organisations in the UK working together to actually survey across children's literature to look at what is the representation like not just in terms of bilingual, but also in terms of representing the realities of the children that we are teaching, so that every child can see and find themselves in the books that are presented in the classrooms. And that's been a challenge to the publishers to say, actually, when the surveys were first done, I think in 2017, there was something like only 7% of the characters in children's literature representative of non-white families. And so, you know, that's been a huge pressure to try to change actually the literature we provide so that children will see their own families, their own cultures, their own backgrounds represented. And so I think, because, you know, we are a multicultural society, that's really an important strand of the work that's happened in the UK, and there's still work to do on that. But I think, you know, we do have fantastic children's literature available, and as Chinny was saying, you know, how that's displayed and presented to children's really important. And that's becoming a collective responsibility. And I think, again, community being a huge part of culture, you know, being a really important strand of what we're doing is building a community of people who feel responsible for those books being not only representative, but well displayed and accessible to children, so that they get time to choose and browse those books. Because I think there are lots of pressures in a school, in a classroom, in a day, in a timetable, and we're always rushing to, you know, do the next thing, move to the next lesson. But actually pausing and taking time for children to browse and spend time with books and make those choices is really important. But so I think, you know, something there around the culture around community, I think, is really important to us.
Are there some common threads then that you see? I mean, as well as working in your home nation, there's obviously international work that goes on. Are there some common threads that you see across the globe with regard to reading for pleasure? And I suppose the flip of that are, do you see anything that's really specific to the area of the world that you're in? So are there any common threads around reading for pleasure that you've seen through your work, both nationally and internationally? And are there anything that is pretty much you know, relatable just to Singapore or just to the UK or just here in the Middle East? Debbie, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, I think one of the threads that I think is really important for us to think about is that actually by providing more time and space for children to read and encouraging reading for pleasure, there's also a tendency that the rich get richer, that actually children who enjoy reading will take that opportunity and seize it and do more of it and spend time in their own time reading. And they will get all of the benefits that comes with, you know, cognitively, socially, relationally. They're going to benefit enormously. And actually what we need to do is shine a light on children who perhaps are from more disadvantaged backgrounds, perhaps disadvantaged in lots of different ways, you know, not necessarily about money, but maybe about time that is or isn't spent with them, and access to books and value being placed on literacy. So children who are disadvantaged in different ways, shining a light on those children and supporting them to become volitional readers is where I feel, you know, we really need a big focus internationally, because it's all very well offering more reading to children who already enjoy it. But actually, if we can reach children who haven't yet found what reading is good for and offer them this volitional reading, we will make a significant change in society. So my feeling is, you know, ensuring that the gap isn't getting wider, ensuring that we're actually ensured those disadvantaged pupils are being reached. I think that's one of the things we perhaps do share, and I think maybe the others will want to pick up on it, but I think parents and parental engagement is potentially a challenge that all of us face in different ways.
Thanks so much, Debbie. You know, as I was reflecting of it, one of the things that I thought was really a real issue across different contexts is the issue of comprehension versus enjoyment, or what you call will versus skill. I think the problem is that we tend to see it as proficiency first, then pleasure. But it really ought to be proficiency together with pleasure. Because if you think about the bedtime reading story that some of our kids are privileged to have, when you're first reading with your child doesn't actually know how to read the book, but they're enjoying the reading experience. Then at some point, your child learns how to read the book, and they're reading together with you. You read a page, they see some words, they recognize it. And then you get to a stage where the child is able to read, but the child still wants to read with you because it's fun, it's something they can do, and then the child can read by himself or herself, but the child may not be able to read certain books. So I think it is not, we need to recognize that both proficiency and pleasure are important. Because if the child was not proficient and you gave the child a book that was too difficult and say, read it by yourself, then there is no pleasure in that. And in that case, you're reading aloud or you're helping the child or matching the child to a right book is very important. In another case, when you've gotten the child to a stage where the child, I would say for most kids between 7 to 9, they kind of get at that level of proficiency if you're able to help them to find books that it really matches with their proficiency and their interest level. They just suddenly become really avid readers and read a lot during that age. So I think in terms of a challenge nationally or internationally across different countries, we need to not see it as a either or. We need to see it as twin things that we need to work on together. And at each time as educators, we are saying, what is the child proficient in? How can we help the child become more proficient? But also, how can we help the child to enjoy books a lot more? So looking at these two, I think the other commonality I see is that reading for pleasure begins to take on importance when the ministries, when the universities, when organizations such as this very organization which is organizing this come together and really work, because then there is a voice. There is somebody who is telling everybody, and not just telling, but providing research as well as giving very practical advice, to equip schools and equip teachers who really want to do their best for the students, but sometimes don't know where to begin. So I think when this comes together, you can begin to see the movement sort of building. Perhaps a key challenge would be just crafting the research and sustaining it over time. And secondly, not just crafting the research, but making sure that the research is translated into ways that people who are on the ground can understand and take action with it. So I think those would be very key challenges.
Do those challenges resonate here in the UAE? Or do you think there are any different ones?
Of course, there might be several commonalities. Really, one of them that it's really just looks at you. All the research that we have read about reading for pleasure, done in any country, on any group of people, in any language, all of them reach the same conclusion. It works. It really works. It does something positive. There is not a single research I have looked at that said it actually did something bad to the kids, or no significant results were found, or nothing positive happened. So it's really incredible. This has been one commonality across and throughout the years. Just look at it longitudinally. The other thing I would say, a commonality, and I hope it becomes also common here, everywhere we look, reading for pleasure worked, or reading in general got established, became a habit in these kids, and the reading became better when it became instituted in the school day. So you have to read for 15 minutes in English, in the English class, oral, the teacher reads, and then the kid reads, and you have to read. That time is sacred every single day in the Arabic language classroom, in the case of the UAE. It cannot be that they will read in English, because they come with this culture established. They come with this habit established. We need to establish it in both languages, in the case of the UAE, and it needs to become organic to the school day and not just as you wish. Do it if you like, don't do it if you don't like. It needs to be part of the schedule, part of every class, and I think we can see different things then.
Thank you. Debbie?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add to that. I think that's something in the UK that we're seeing is where schools are strategic about the work that they do. So, like you said, forming that habit and asking and saying, you know, this has to happen, but also deciding strategically how to do that and how to enact that. So that it's not, I think we went through a period in the UK where people went, oh, reading for pleasure, or we'll do lots of that. Let's have lots of activities. And we have, you know, we have World Book Day, which is fantastic. And we have lots of initiatives going on, but schools were sort of scattergunning, you know, and they were things that then didn't last because, oh, we did that last year, but we haven't kind of carried on doing that this year. But when we then got leaders on board to say, let's plan this out and let's do it in a strategic way, and also let's look at the impact that it's having. And being able to be rigorous about impact in reading for pleasure has been a challenge. And I'm sure it's perhaps a shared challenge because it feels like something sort of ephemeral that we can't get hold of to say, you know, how have we improved that? How's that better? How do we rate enjoyment? How do we show we're, you know, improving people's pleasure? It's quite hard. And actually finding ways to do that has really helped schools to be able to be more rigorous, being able to measure the impact it's having on students. So I think that's potentially a shared challenge. And the other thing that came to mind as both of you were talking was that knowledge our teachers need to have and that knowledge of what it is to be a reader. And that's definitely been a challenge. We've been working in the UK with our higher education institutes, working with student teachers, because we found there was a phenomenon. We had teachers that were saying to us, well, I'm not a reader and I don't enjoy reading. And we were like, but you're going to be teaching our children. You know, we need to work this out. So we've done initiatives with universities having student reading ambassadors and working very closely with their peers, so peer-to-peer mentoring around reading, to explore what it is to be a reader and explore what it means to be a reading teacher. And that's been really powerful work that's continuing. There's quite a lot of research on that in the UK at the moment. So I think that's, you know, some of the common challenges I think that we share.
Maybe I just want to add a little bit about time and share about some of the examples that have happened in Singapore. You know, in one of the schools that I was doing research with, they actually set aside time for reading, both in the English class and in the mother tongue class. And what was really special about that school was that they didn't just set aside time before the school day. Many schools set aside time and say, if you come early, go to the classroom and you're supposed to read. They actually set aside the first period and said the first period is for reading. And what was unusual was for the English classroom, it would be free reading because the kids were very competent and, you know, they felt like they were able to read. But for the language classrooms, they would have prepared readings, not necessarily like forced readings. The teacher wouldn't be doing anything, but they said, well, you know, because our students do not know how to look for books in this language, so we provide them with either articles or things that they can read so that they don't have to worry about finding things to read. And when we interviewed the students, and this is a high-performing school in Singapore, one of the top schools, and the students actually said, you know what, we really like this reading period because we are so busy that, you know, this gives us the time to calm down and to be still at the beginning of the day to read, and we really enjoy it. So, you know, it's a good way for the kids to start the day.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of the panel questions, and we're going to have one more question, which I'm going to ask the panel to answer quite sharply, because then I'd like to open the floor up for about 14 or 15 minutes if there are any questions. So if you are thinking of anything that you'd like to ask the panel, please be brave and stick your hand up, and we'll take some questions from the audience. So final question, maybe in a 30 seconds each. What's the future? What does reading look like for pleasure for young people in the future, both where you currently are and globally?
I'm optimistic that it will get better. And I think for me, in terms of the future, what I do hope is that a child who doesn't necessarily come from a reading home will have the opportunity to learn to love to read at school. So I hope that schools can be equalizers and not reproducers of that inequity in terms of reading access. That's for me.
Thank you. I think in the future, the need for reading and the ability to read fast, to scan fast, will be much more needed than even now, just because of that knowledge keeps on exploding, and we need to be fast to read, comprehend, choose what we want, decide if something is fake, is not true, is AI made up, or whatever it is, and move on. So the need for reading will not diminish at all.
Yeah, and I think similarly, I'm positive too, in terms of the place of reading and its importance. I think its importance not just academically, but its importance to our well-being. And I think there's significant research in that area at the moment around reading and mental health. And I think that's the part that it's also going to play for us in the future in supporting us in our well-being.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. And as a principal of a school, I've made many a mental note. So over to the audience. I think we've got some microphones. If anybody would like to ask a question, if you can raise your hand. There's one gone up there already. Yes, the lady in the third back row.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Desislava Kuzova. I'm the librarian at Dubai International Academy, Emirates Hills. And I have a question that I think deserves another conference by itself. But you spoke a lot about building a community and about how kids less and less have time to read at home. They spend more time at school. And actually, all of us, I think we spend more time with our colleagues and students than with our family. The same goes for the parents. They are busy. They have less and less time to study and read the kids. They just want to spend quality emotional time with them. So how do we involve the parents in the school community? Because that becomes more and more the center point of meeting everyone, both students and parents, and getting them involved in reading for pleasure. We spoke a lot about only students, but I think parents as role models are very important of raising this culture of reading for pleasure with the kids. So what is your experience, best advices, or something you really notice as a tendency, how we can more and more involve parents as part of our learning and reading community, what we are trying to build in.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to start on that one? Debbie?
Yeah, I mean, my experience working with schools in the UK has been that we talk about building a in-school reading culture first, and actually a strength in that community before it reaches out to work with its parents, and actually understanding what it means, what we believe reading for pleasure means, what we believe the key things we want parents to be supporting with, our understanding and knowledge of children's literature being really strong with our teachers, before we move out to then work with those parents. Because actually what we don't want to do is say, you know, start talking to your parents about reading with their children, but I don't know enough books to recommend, is actually putting teachers on the back foot. So we talk about building the culture in school first and having a really strong understanding of what this means and why this is important to us before we then move out to work with parents, but also using children as the vehicle to do that too. So we see the establishment of independent reading time in school as a way of sort of teaching that habit of reading that children can then take into the home context. And we've seen some great examples of where children might come from actually quite illiterate homes, taking those books home and saying, I've set up my own reading area at home. I've created my own space. I'm going to read in my space at home. So influencing the home culture around reading through the children as well. So that's, I think for us in the UK, that's been the approach we've taken. But I know that the approach has been slightly different in the programme that you've taken. It's been about working alongside with parents, hasn't it?
That's true. Parents workshops, parents reading to them, having them come to school to read to their kids and read with them. So there is a lot to do, but I do believe it's really great what you said, that it needs to start from school. When it's a struggle to get to parents, you need to let them be for now. Start with the school, start in the school with the children. And maybe there is like a personal story I have. My child, who's now at the university doing her PhD, she, for some reason, by age 4 or 5, every time I read to them every morning, every evening before bed, she was not enjoying it. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to have a child who does not like reading, who is not enjoying books? What do I do? And I would read in Arabic, and their dad would read in English, and, you know, would do everything, and she's not enjoying this stuff. While her older sister, she loved books. So she comes from school one day, and she goes, Mama, I want you to buy for me this book. I'm like, what book? And she says, Captain Underpants. So it seems I was not reading for her the types of books she liked at the time. And there you see, and she converted. she became a reader. So start at school. Sometimes what the school does, get them hooked, and they will do the job at home. One final saying, they say, birds have wings, humans have books.
Can we take the next question? Sorry to cut you off. I'm going to ask you to answer the next question. Otherwise, we'll be out of time because I know that we've not got a lot of time left, a couple of minutes. One final question. I'm sorry that we're running out of time. Very quickly. Please, the question, the lady at the front with the mic, if you want to ask the question, and then we'll come to the back.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Dr. Fatma Said from Zayed University with Dr. Hanada. One of the things that I think we have to probably think about is the digital age. How do we encourage a reading for pleasure when it's easier for me to either listen to a podcast or have the book read to me or watch the film of the book? So how do we get students to, and I think that's one of the threads we want to explore, how do you get students to read for pleasure when there are other easier avenues to getting the information? Thank you.
Thanks. I think that is a really interesting question. Actually, in our research on print and digital reading, what we do find is that teenagers, the great majority, actually still prefer to read the printed book compared to reading online and reading digitally. There's a lot you can do with the book. You can flip the pages. It is tactile. The images, you interact. You often read, and I go back to the parent question. When the parent is reading with you, there is that kind of emotional connection. Not in yours, sorry, but wrong book. But there is that sort of emotional connection. So I think one answer to it is that we need more print books for students, especially in our libraries. And what we've been proposing is to have that sort of print and digital kind of think about it ecologically rather than saying they are all online now, so give them a phone, they will read online, they will watch online. Actually, the kids want to read because it is a way of relaxing. And when they want to read, sometimes they don't want to read on their phones. They know it is distracting. So having that physical book is actually quite helpful. So I think it helps to understand that there are different ways of accessing a book. If I watch Harry Potter, it's quite different from if I read Harry Potter, and kids often do both, and some kids like the movie better, but some kids like to read it because you get to know more about a character, you get into it. So I do think that with reading, you get that sort of deep immersion. To answer that bit about the technology though, I do think that, having screen time is pretty important. And we mustn't fall into they have screens, so let them use screens as much as they like, because I think it does build a habit, especially when they're younger, to help them to find other forms of distraction, entertainment that are not on the screen, and that's still valuable, and reading is one of those.
We've got time for the lady in the corner, just one final question, otherwise they'll fire me and never invite me back. Can we just have the last question?
Dr. Loh, since your country has a variety of language, such as the main language that the student studies in the school, and how do you grow it? Because your language you from in Singapore, why not in this school you teach? We have teaching this language or not? Because we have different language, and which is the main language.
Thank you. Yeah. So in Singapore, it's a little bit less complicated than the situation over here because English is the language of education.
Yes.
And it's the official language of communication, of business. So everybody does English as their first language. Whereas the second language, the mother tongue, you do have lessons every day, but you do math in English, you do science in English, you do history in English. Yes. So it is much easier for the different schools to have the same strategy. In terms of the mother tongue, there is more of an emphasis now on reading for pleasure. It used to be that, it's more about reading comprehension. But we do see, because, for example, Chinese is a difficult language to learn. So when the kids...
But in my country, we're teaching this language, China, in the school.
Yeah. Sorry, you teach in?
No, I'm not teaching.
Okay.
I'm learning resource specialist.
Okay, yeah. But what I wanted to say was that because the Chinese language is more difficult to master and they have less time to study it, that's why they don't enjoy reading the Chinese books as much. By the time they are really proficient, they are already 14, and then they have their phones, and then it's very distracting. So that is part of the issue that we have to grow their reading for pleasure in the other language as well.
Thank you so much. We
so
have
much.
run out of time. Time has beaten us again. Time for reading, time for listening, time for answer questions. So much. Debbie, thank you so much. Loh Chin, thank you so much. Hanada, thank you so much. I believe that they're going to be around for at least the rest of the day and tomorrow. So if you've got any questions that have been raised during this session, please approach them. They would love to talk to you about reading for pleasure, because that's what we're all here for. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the guests. Thank you.